Hello, everyone. My name is Alyssa Klein, and I serve as the Minnesota Vocational Rehabilitation Services Transition and Pre-Employment Transition Specialist. And with me is...
Hello, everyone. I'm Ann Macklett. I'm the VRS Training and Development Specialist. And I also have...
And I'm Sarah Sundin. I am the Rehabilitation Program Specialist on the Community Partnerships team.
We welcome you to this series of training for our contracted community partners to help you in understanding pre-employment transition services, or pre-ETS. This first module will give you the basics of what pre-ETS are and who can receive them. Here's our agenda for this training module. First, we'll give an overview of pre-employment transition services. Then we'll explain the definition of a student with a disability for pre-ETS purposes. And last, we'll review some resources. So, what are pre-employment transition services? In July of 2014, President Barack Obama signed the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, into law. WIOA created a new vision for how America prepares an educated and skilled workforce that expands opportunity for all workers and employers. WIOA amended the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which is the federal vocational rehabilitation law, to include two primary changes that impact youth with disabilities. And one of those primary changes is the addition of a new set of services called pre-ETS. Bottom line, pre-ETS is about increasing the opportunities and supports for young people with disabilities to be prepared for competitive integrated employment after they graduate high school. Pre-ETS requires more collaboration than ever before between VRS, schools, county social services, and you as our contracted community partners. The success of youth with disabilities depends on all of us coming together to create a seamless system of services and supports. Pre-ETS are these 5 required activities. Number 1, job exploration counseling. Number 2 is work-based learning experiences. Number 3 is post-secondary education counseling. Number 4, workplace readiness training. And number 5 is instruction in self-advocacy. In this and other training modules, we'll be focusing on what these 5 services entail and how we can have them available to all students with disabilities across the state. WIOA requires every state VR program to spend 15% of their federally allocated funds on pre-ETS. In Minnesota, that amounts to about $6.8 million each year. WIOA also creates greater flexibility in serving students with disabilities so that more can be served. It states that we must provide pre-ETS to students who are eligible for the traditional VR program, as well as students who are potentially eligible for the program. Students who are eligible for VR are those that have applied for VR services and are determined eligible. VRS counselors create employment plans with those students and include pre-ETS and other VR services as a part of their employment plan. Potentially eligible students are those that have not applied for the VR program yet. VRS is able to serve them just by getting verification that they have a disability without much documentation about that disability, and verification that they are in an education program and are between the ages of 14 and 21. VRS pre-ETS representatives serve the potentially eligible students as soon as they receive that verification. No employment plan is needed. We just need to know that what the student wants and needs, and then we work to see that they get those services. The Rehabilitation Services Administration, or RSA, which administers the federal VR program, describes pre-ETS as the earliest set of services available for students with disabilities under the VR program. RSA emphasizes that pre-ETS are meant to be short-term in nature and are designed to help students identify their career interests. Those are important aspects to keep in mind. pre-ETs are purely about career exploration and preparation. They aren't meant to be intensive or long-term. They are meant to help a student get on the right pathway. If a student needs more services or supports beyond these pre-ET services, then they are to get them through the regular VR program. This visual helps to wrap our heads around that intent. You will see that pre-ETs would come first and early on for young people with disabilities. Again, they are available to youth that are eligible or potentially eligible for the VR program. Then, as needed, other VR services are provided along their career journey to help them implement their career plan. And of course, all of these services would ultimately lead to competitive integrated employment. In reality, when students that are eligible for the VR program are receiving pre-ETs, they may also be receiving other VR services too. And sometimes pre-ETs and regular VR services are provided in combination with each other. So now I'm going to hand it over to Anne.
Traditional or general VR services include counseling and guidance, assessment services, work-based learning coaching or job coaching, post-secondary training, assistive technology, job placement and other related services, and much more, and many services otherwise. All of these services are to support a person to be successful in preparing for, obtaining, maintaining, or advancing in employment. In contrast to pre-ET services, general VR services are more comprehensive and can be provided after a young person is no longer in school. VRS must make pre-ETs available to all students with disabilities across the state. Pre-ETs are provided in collaborations with secondary schools. In fact, high schools and 18 to 21 transition programs are the primary provider of pre-ETs. Any student who has a disability is considered potentially eligible for pre-ETs. As Alyssa mentioned, there are 5 pre-ETs required services. Required in this case means that VRS must make these services available to all students that need them. But VRS is not required to provide them to every student with a disability, just make them available to every student with a disability. While the $6.8 million VRS is required to spend each year may seem like a lot of money, it could never cover all of the pre-ETs needed that all students have. So that is why it's important that VRS works closely with schools to understand what they are providing and then decide where our limited resources should be expended. And while pre-ETs are required to be available, it does not mean that we must always provide all pre-ETs services to all students we serve, that students receive one service before another, or that a student receives a certain number of pre-ET services. The job of VRS is to fill the gaps. This language from the RSA regulations note that VR programs must not take on what schools are obligated to provide. With special education services, schools are required to provide transition services as part of the IEP programming. So pre-ETs are a component of those transition services. It is very important to keep in mind that pre-ETs are not about assessment. They are purely about exploration. So to differentiate between the two, let's look at the synonyms of each. On the slide, you can see for exploration, synonyms include words such as search, journey, or adventure. These words remind me of a broad open slate. They make me think of fun, flexibility, and student-driven type of approach. They equate to allowing the student to learn what's possible and what's out there and all of those possibilities. Whereas synonyms for assessment include evaluation, analysis, and recommendation. These words make me think of a more prescriptive process that is often directed by someone other than the student, that someone else is making those observations and suggestions for that student. Now, of course, there's a place for assessment at times. An assessment, just to know, this isn't just part of pre-ETS, so it isn't part of pre-ETS. Here's another way to look at that. Exploration means that a student understands their interests. They get to reflect on what they like, dislike, and what they've learned. And then they make a decision based on those things moving forward. For assessment, we may help a person understand their interest, but it will also include an evaluation of their skills and abilities. And an evaluator is making observations, creating reports, and determining limitations and needs. So to summarize, pre-ETS is student-driven and informal. When you as a community partner report on pre-ETS and the pre-ETS services, the report should only include opinions from that student, or in the case of a work experience, from that employer. In a VRS assessment service, you or a VRS staff person is driving the process in a more formal way. And then you or the VRS staff are reporting on the outcomes in an evaluative way. And now I'll pass it on to Sarah.
So the last part of this module is to help you understand the definition of a student with a disability for the purposes of pre-ETS services. In other words, who are the individuals that are eligible for pre-ETS services? There are 3 parts to the definition that we will review. The first is disability, the second is age, and the third is an educational program. So let's dig into number 1, disability. A student just needs to have an official record that documents a disability. These documents include an IEP, a 504 plan, a medical or mental health note or record of or a Social Security award letter. For students to receive pre-ETS as a potentially eligible student, VRS just needs to receive verification from a school staff member or other professional that this documentation exists. Or the VRS staff member can verify by seeing one of these documents and case noting that they have seen the documentation. For students to be eligible for traditional VR services, VR counselors need to obtain and retain more information about the disability in the VR case record. The second component in the definition of a student with a disability for pre-ETS purposes is age. This visual depicts the age range for a student to receive pre-ETS, which is ages 14 through age 21. You may hear the term youth used at times, particularly with other WIOA mandates, which prohibits youth through the age of 24 from entering into sub-minimum wage employment without accessing VR services first. But to be clear, pre-ETS can only be provided through age 21. They must end at age 22. The final component of the definition of a student with a disability is educational program. The person must be enrolled in a program that yields a recognized credential in order to receive pre-ETS services. This includes traditional secondary education programs like a high school and transition program. It can also include alternative programs like alternative learning centers, homeschooling, or adult basic education programs that support students to receive their GED. Lastly, it can also include post-secondary programs. Here's a definition of recognized credentials of education. To be honest, the primary audience for pre-ETS are those who are working on obtaining their high school diploma or GED. However, it is nice that we're also able to provide pre-ETS to young people that are in post-secondary education and training when those services are needed. The question for you that might arise is, what about summertime, breaks, or gaps in their educational programming? First, Students that graduate from high school can still receive pre-ETs as long as they are enrolled in a post-secondary education program that yields a credential. That means they could still receive pre-ETs during the summer between graduation from high school and the fall semester. VRS just needs to receive documentation from the post-secondary education program that indicates their enrollment. The same goes for any other break or gap in schooling. As long as VRS has documentation that they're enrolled and that their spot is being held for them, then they can continue to receive pre-ET services. So let's summarize. All three of these components must be checked in order for a person to receive pre-ET services. 1, they must have a disability. 2, they must be between the ages of 14 and 21. And 3, they must be enrolled in an educational program. So for fun, let's test your skills on identifying individuals that are eligible for pre-ETs. Take out a piece of paper and pause this video while you answer the following 5 questions. Once done, play the video again and we'll review the answers. Note all of the ways these students have disabilities. Okay, let's come back and review the answers. Letter A reads, Jeremy is 17 years old and is a junior at XYZ High School. The answer is yes. He is obviously a pre-ET student because he is still in high school. Letter B reads, True is 18 years old, graduated from high school in June, and is enrolled to attend ABC Community College in August. The answer again is yes. As long as the individual is enrolled in an educational program, they're considered students on the breaks between the terms. Letter C, Gilbert is 22 years old and attends ABC Community College. The answer is no. Once an individual turns 22, they can no longer be considered a student for the purposes of pre-ETs. Letter D, Daniela is 19 years old and attends adult basic education GED classes. The answer here is yes. Daniela is working on her GED, which is a recognized credential of education. And finally, E, Ion is 20 years old and attends a Metro CRP for office skills training. The answer here would be, it depends. If a CRP does not have the student take an exam for a recognized credential at the end of the program, then it does not count. Okay, so we're just about done, but before we leave, we want to show you where you can receive more information about pre-ETs. VRS has web pages for high school students and those that support them. The first link takes you to our main page. The second link takes you to a page where you can find the VRS staff assigned to each high school. You will see that there is a counselor and a pre-ETs representative directory at the top of the page. Otherwise, you can select by the city, district, or school, and the counselor and pre-ETs rep assigned will magically pop up for you. The third link is the page we have for high school staff. You might be interested in reviewing resources we have available for them. In particular, the VRS Education Partnership Guide describes roles and how school and VRS staff can reestablish relationships each fall. Last and most important is the link for you, our professional and technical contracted providers. This series of training modules and other recorded trainings and webinars have been saved here. The resource tab has many other items that we will be reviewing in upcoming modules. For now, I will call out the Minnesota Pre-ETs Toolkit as it is the first resource that I would recommend you review. It lists all 5 of the required pre-ETs services along with activities, lessons plans, and other resources that can help you in implementing pre-ETs services. When you can't find the answer online, feel free to contact any VRS staff listed in this slide. Last but not least, thank you for participating in this training and for partnering with VRS in providing pre-ETs services. We couldn't do this important work without you. our community partners.